Hello, and welcome to part 2 of the lecture, History of Religion in China. Today, we're going to talk about Confucianism and Chinese popular or folk religion. You see Confucius pictured here. Confucianism traces back to the sayings of Confucius, sometimes called the Analects of Confucius, which were compiled by his disciples somewhere around the 4th century BC. Confucius's goal, we could say, was to promote appropriate behavior for educated elites who desired a position in the government bureaucracy. Confucius himself traveled for most of his adult life, accompanied by a few of his disciples, hoping for an influential government position, an advisory position among the sovereign states of the Zhou dynasty. This is during the spring and autumn period, when the Zhou dynasties, when the ruler's power is already beginning to wane, where all of the different fiefdoms, we could say, all the kingdoms that he'd given to relatives and military advisors and generals and all like this, were starting to turn on one another. And life was beginning to be defined as a zero-sum game. If you weren't winning, you were losing. So we have Confucius going from state to state and not having much luck. Right? He would die in relative obscurity, which is ironic given the popularity of Confucianism today. I'll go through a few of the main themes. The first was he didn't consider himself to be an innovator. He considered himself to be an expert in the classics. He believed, from his reading of the classics, that in the distant past, civilization had already been figured out, how humans go together, right? Or what their goals should be, how they should treat each other, was figured out a long time ago and forgotten. So he sought, in his words, he sought to bring back the ways of the past, the rituals of earlier times, so that we could reestablish social harmony. A radical idea of the time was meritocracy, right? To reward deserving people with positions of power and authority and responsibility. This was at a time when power was generally passed on with lineage, right? Where a powerful father begat a powerful son. And if you achieved, victory on the battlefield, you would set your family up so that they would become a powerful lineage. There wasn't much room. There wasn't much of a social ladder to climb. Confucius thought to change this, that if people cultivate themselves in a certain way, that they can ascend the ranks and achieve influential positions. Probably most notable, and it is very apparent in the reading that I gave you for this lecture, he sought to encourage people to follow what he termed the 5 virtues, and I'll go through those virtues now. The culminating virtue, the one that the other 4 virtues sort of lead to, is Ren, which I've translated as caring for humanity. And the meaning of the character can be gleaned from the character itself. So there are 2, what we call radicals, 2 components of this character. And the component on the left side, that looks like this, right, is just the character for person, which is also Ren. And the radical on the right-hand side, just the 2 parallel lines, is the number 2. So as a concept, right, as an ethical concept, as a religious concept, what this character says is we're not radically alone. We're never radically alone. When we're born, we must be cared for or we'll die. And when we're old, we need someone to feed us and change our diapers, right? We need each other, right? So cultivating the habits and rituals that would later become Confucianism has this concept as its foundation. We are in a world together. We're inseparable from one another, and we need each other. So we have to focus on these relationships. The second, and these are in no particular order, right, is appropriateness. Know when to do or say the right thing at the right time. That people get a sense, people who are cultivating themselves, get a sense of where to be and what to do, to the point where their actions are graceful, to the point where it's almost like a dance that you learn or a martial art that you master, that there are people that encounter this world with such grace that it almost seems effortless, right? We talked about this effortlessness in Taoism too. In a Confucian context, this would be called appropriateness. The second is Li, good habits, good acknowledgement of rituals. And to say a word about this, maybe in the contemporary world, we understand habits like always brush your teeth, and rituals, like, the behavior is appropriate at a funeral, as something completely different. But in Confucianism, they aren't completely different. We could say the comportment, right? The way that you hold your body, the thoughts that you think about while you do a certain thing. You can practice doing it in such a way that it's appropriate, that it's the best possible way to do it, right? So, for example, I make coffee in a French press every morning. And if I don't have coffee in the morning, or I'm out of coffee, and even if I go somewhere else to get coffee, it's just not quite the same. Like, I have this habit, and while I'm making coffee, I think about the day. Right, I just think about all the things that this caffeine could help me achieve, and things like this. And it seems mundane. It seems minor. But if I don't do it right, there's something that's sort of off. Like, it's not serious, but it's just a little bit different. For Confucianism, if we treat everything that we do in a day with this ritual importance, that society, again, the emphasis is always broad, that perhaps we can have better expectations of one another. Perhaps as a society, we're more glued together. We're more understanding. We're more accommodating if we practice everything with this sort of mindfulness, from the small, making coffee, for example, to the large, what you do at a wedding. All this is part of the same cultivation. The next is zhi, wisdom. We can't get through life, right? Not in a way that would be advantageous for us without knowledge of the past, right? Without knowledge of how, just like in Taoism, how the cyclical forces that shape our surroundings, how they turn, so that we can get a sense of how things will change and lead into the future. This is important in Confucianism too. We have to cultivate a sense of what's worked, right? And what is most appropriate for, the place that we are in its historic and cultural and social sense. And all this is brought together with wisdom. And the last is xin, honesty. Never say anything that you wouldn't be quoted on. Never say anything that you don't deep in your heart mean, and you'll stay out of trouble. I want to say a few words about harmony and naturalness in the Confucian tradition. I'm sure you've gotten the sense that it's a very human-centered, right? A human-centered religion, a human-centered philosophy, and you're not wrong. But there's a twist. Confucianism teaches that if humans can order themselves, put themselves in order, and order their social world, then the environment itself becomes ordered and things operate smoothly and efficiently. As humans, we bring something to the world that can actually improve it, right? A Confucian doesn't think that we're only harbingers of destruction, right? But that there's something about humans and how we are that brings harmony between the human social world and the natural world. A Confucian would say that harmony in the natural world isn't suitably accomplished without harmony in the human world. Oh, sorry about that. I'm back. I was talking about harmony and naturalness. According to Confucianism, the world is at its best when it's civilized, with a human impact, not when it's chaotic and wild. There is no reverence for untouched nature in Confucianism because humans bring something to it. They bring an order that wasn't there before. You can see here in the picture that's the background, we see those mountains so characteristic of southern China, and then we see civilization just nested perfectly within it, right? There's no undue destruction There's just humans and nature getting along together, almost as if they fit. The idea is that a world is this when it's in harmony. The world is all of the different elements fitting together, and the human impact is apparent in this harmony. So if we're going to talk about naturalness, we're in a bit of a strange position. There isn't this reverence for the natural world. So how are humans natural? Confucianism is concerned about naturalness, but not in the same way that Taoism is. There's no return to nature. For Confucianism, naturalness is the cultivation. You're more natural, we could say, as an adult than you are a child. That seems weird, right? Because children react spontaneously, right? They are the most natural. But for Confucianism, the cultivating of humans to their most admirable, right? A person who tells the truth, a person who succeeded based on their merit. All these features are what's natural. We're at our best when we're at our most natural. When we live in a society where everyone helps one another, where everyone meets one another's expectations, you're probably thinking in your head, impossible utopia, but this social arrangement would be humans at their most natural. Recognizing the importance of one's parents, thanking them for bringing you into this world, for giving you your body, right? Thanking your grandparents for the lineage that you come from, and your ancestors in ritualized ways. For Confucianism, this is natural. This expresses what you'd like to say to them in a way that is always heard well, is always well received. Rituals guide one toward cultivating good habits that ensure that you say what you mean, that you do what you feel, and that society serves all people. I want to say a few words about Tao in the Confucian context. Tao isn't the proprietary material of Taoism. Almost every early Chinese philosophy or religion has a concept of Tao. We could say that Confucianism emphasizes not that Tao is the overarching natural pattern, right, of the cosmos, like we could say Taoists do, but if you think of Tao as, in its literal translation, as a path, right, a path, let's say, through the woods, you're going on a hike, and there's a path there, and your goal is to, wander around the forest but not get lost, so you follow the path, right? The path is there to be followed, but if we think of a dirt path right through the forest, everyone that walks on it, every time it's walked on, the path flattens, the path broadens, the path becomes a little easier to follow. We could say that for Confucians, this is the ethical, moral component of Tao, that you choose it. You follow a way that's laid out by exemplary people, right? People who are a good example. But also your choice to walk it makes the path bigger for everyone else to follow. When one cultivates the 5 virtues, there's a term, it's junzi in Chinese. The text that I gave you translates it as gentleman, which is old-fashioned and a little problematic because there's nothing about cultivating the 5 virtues today that's explicitly masculine or something achievable only by men. But historically, it was. So the choice to translate junzi as gentleman, right, the culmination of the 5 virtues, results in someone, who is ready to take on an important, influential government position, male, right? But today, the Confucian in a religious sense, could be male or female. So I want you to keep that in mind because the reading translates it as gentleman, and anyone can follow this, right? There's no precondition, right? And it's cultivating some pretty common sense sorts of religious precepts. So that is the end of the Confucianism section. Actually, I wanted to talk about one more thing. I wanted to talk about my favorite passage, which is the very first one. Basically, the person who can put things into practice, can practice what they preach, can take what they learned and apply it. Isn't it a wonderful world where what we learn makes sense and fits? The second is, isn't it wonderful to have friends come from far away? Isn't it wonderful how we can connect even across vast distances? And the third, isn't it wonderful not to be mad when you try your best but things don't go your way? We'll talk about these a little bit at the beginning of the next lecture.